When it comes to making history, there are few figures, both before and after, who have left an indelible mark on the world stage with the same gravity and significance as Winston Churchill. His extraordinary influence resonates particularly during the tumultuous years between 1939 and 1945, a period that was undeniably cloaked in darkness as nations grappled with the harrowing realities of World War II. This was not just a conflict, it was an epoch that forged the destinies of nations and irrevocably shaped the latter half of the 20th century. Some may contend that Churchill was an unlikely hero, a man thrust into the crucible of war amidst doubts and challenges.
Sure I am that this day, now, we are the masters of our fate, that the task which has been set us is not above our strength, that its pangs and toils are not beyond our endurance. As long as we have faith in our cause and an unconquerable willpower, salvation will not be denied us.
The fascinating story of this distinguished English statesman began long before the ominous clouds of World War II began to form. It took place in Blenheim Palace, one of the nation's grandest stately homes, located near Woodstock in Oxfordshire. Blenheim has been the ancestral home of the Dukes of Marlborough since it was bestowed upon Sir John Churchill, the first Duke. Following the Battle of Blenheim in 1704, Winston's father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was the third son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough, and his mother, prior to her marriage to Randolph, was Jenny Jerome, an acclaimed American beauty and the daughter of a New York millionaire. In the late 19th century, numerous American heiresses married into the British aristocracy, including Lady Nancy Astor, who became the first woman MP to sit in the Houses of Parliament. The vivacious American girls were glamorous additions to Victorian and Edwardian society, and Jenny was exceedingly popular among the highest echelons. Indeed, when Winston entered the world on the 30th of November, 1874, at the early hour of 1:30 a.m., weeks ahead of schedule, speculation arose that he may have interrupted his mother's evening at a lavish gathering in Blenheim. In true Winston fashion, when questioned about this event in his later years, he remarked that although he was present, he had no recollection of the events leading up to his arrival. As the first male offspring of a mere third son, it was deemed improbable for Winston to inherit the grand estate of Blenheim, or the illustrious title of Duke of Marlborough. However, for a fleeting 5 years in the 1890s, he stood as the heir presumptive. Ultimately, the title passed on to his cousin and lifelong confidant, yet Blenheim forever held a cherished place in Churchill's heart. From cradle to grave, quite literally. Typical of the aristocracy of that period, there was minimal interaction between parents and their children, though Winston harbored a deep admiration for his mother and yearned for her presence. His sadness over her infrequent visits was softened by the nurturing guidance of his devoted nanny, Mrs. Everest, with whom he shared a profound bond. Upon arriving at boarding school, Winston displayed a defiant and strong-willed nature, resulting in regular punishments. Nevertheless, as he grew older, he developed a lasting passion for English and history that stayed with him throughout his life. Much like his peers, Winston experienced a solitary early life characterized by a distance from his family. With his brother John, affectionately called Jack, being 6 years his junior, it seems unlikely that Winston had any vivid memories of a joyful childhood as he grew into adulthood. For a great leader destined to rise and command his nation amidst the turmoil of conflict, the onset of Churchill's military career was nothing short of underwhelming. After 3 grueling attempts, he finally secured a spot at Sandhurst's prestigious Royal Military Academy. Yet merely a year later, Winston emerged victorious, proudly standing 20th among a throng of 130 peers. But just as he prepared to embrace his commission, an opportunity that would whisk him away to India with the Queen's own hussars, the shadow of tragedy fell upon him as his father passed away at the heartbreakingly young age of 45. Driven by an unyielding resolve to carve out his legacy before the age of 40, little did he know that fate had something far more poignant in store. After his adventures in India, Winston Churchill set sail for the vibrant shores of Cuba, fueled by a burning curiosity to witness the fierce clash between the Spanish forces and Cuban guerrillas. This journey wasn't just a detour. It heralded the dawn of Churchill's illustrious literary career, as he was commissioned to chronicle the turbulent conflict for the Daily Graphic. Throughout his tenure in the military, Churchill immersed himself in the world of journalism, crafting captivating articles for various newspapers and serving as a war correspondent for the Morning Post, all while tirelessly penning his first seminal works. Churchill bid farewell to the army in 1899, following in the footsteps of his father to pursue a political path. He emerged as the Conservative candidate in a by-election for Oldham, yet faced defeat. That year, the war ignited between the British and the Afrikaners in South Africa. Winston swiftly resumed his role as a war correspondent and set off for the front lines. Along with publishing 2 more books focused on the Boer War, Churchill found himself transformed into a minor hero. Captured as a prisoner of war, he orchestrated a daring escape, traversing 300 miles to rejoin the fray. Now he was not just a reporter, but also making headlines, a thrilling reality he was destined to embrace. As the 20th century began to unfold, Churchill made his way back to Britain and re-entered the tumultuous arena of politics. When he took the stage in Oldham during the pivotal general election of 1900, he emerged victorious as the newly elected Member of Parliament. Even at this nascent phase of his career, Churchill exhibited extraordinary courage in defending his principles. When the time came for him to stand against his own party due to his deep convictions, he did not hesitate. Indeed, in 1904, his disagreements with the Conservatives became so pronounced that he boldly crossed the floor of the House to join the ranks of the Liberal Party. A few years later, in 1908, Winston met and fell in love with perhaps the most important person in his long and prosperous life, Clementine Hozier. They wed 6 months later in London. Churchill's rise within the Liberal Party was meteoric, culminating in his cabinet roles as President of the Board of Trade, Home Secretary, and by 1911, First Lord of the Admiralty. A relentless and polarizing figure, he faced intense political turmoil as the shadow of the First World War loomed ever closer. Travel today to Turkey's hauntingly beautiful Gallipoli Peninsula, where the Dardanelles starkly separate Europe from Asia. Here, amidst breathtaking serenity, lurks a tragic history. Back in 1915, as World War I raged on, countless British and Allied soldiers met their fates in harrowing conditions. Among the Allied leaders tasked with orchestrating the ill-fated Gallipoli campaign, Winston Churchill faced monumental consequences when it unraveled disastrously, costing over 500,000 brave souls their lives. The aftermath shook the House of Commons as Prime Minister Asquith struggled to assemble an all-party coalition government. In a desperate bid for their support, the Conservative faction demanded nothing less than Churchill's demotion from his revered position as First Lord of the Admiralty. After agonizing months of stagnation and political turmoil, Winston reluctantly resigned from his governmental duties. Yet undeterred, he remained a Member of Parliament and volunteered to confront the grim realities on the Western Front. bearing witness to the horrific atrocities of trench warfare firsthand. Following World War I, Churchill returned to domestic politics while remaining as vocal as ever. In 1922, as the Liberals faced internal conflicts, Winston lost his seat and was not re-elected to the House of Commons in the 1923 general election. At this point in his career, he was less worried about others' opinions regarding his principles. He slowly distanced himself from the Liberals and rejoined the Conservative Party. Outside of London, Winston and Clementine acquired a country retreat known as Chartwell House in Kent.
It's a house which contains many personal memories of one of Britain's greatest sons. Earl Mountbatten points out its significance.
Chartwell was Sir Winston Churchill's very private retreat, where he could relax, paint his pictures, build a wall, play with his budgergar, feed his fish, and think. And who can doubt that some of his great decisions were made as a result of his chance of thinking quietly here at Chartwell? I knew Sir Winston for more than 50 years, and yet when we first met, I was a young naval cadet, and his name was already a household word. Here at Chartwell, he wrote most of his memoirs. And what a story he had to tell.
What a story indeed. The home of a great man who led his fellow men through peril to ultimate victory. The memorabilia which fill Chartwell record this epic of our century. This is Sir Winston's study, where his Knights of the Garter banner hangs. Leaders of many nations were personal friends. Sir Winston's library boasted hundreds of fine volumes. His own brilliant history of World War II stands on these shelves. The drawing room is steeped in the atmosphere of his family life and of his many interests outside of politics. He was a racehorse owner, and his love for fine cigars and a good game of cards are common knowledge. A portrait of Lady Churchill, his wife, for 57 wonderful years. And this is Lady Churchill's bedroom. At Chartwell, Sir Winston's presence still lingers. It's almost as if he has not really departed. During quiet moments, you can almost imagine that you hear his familiar, friendly voice.
Neither the sudden shock of battle nor the long-drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Give us the tools, and we will finish the job.
He knew that for an active man, the best relaxation is a hobby. So he learned to lay bricks, building this wall, whenever he had spare time during a 7-year period. Chartwell has now been opened to the public, to the citizens of his nation and the world which he loved. Sir Winston's memory will always be here. This home is a monument to a man greatly loved and admired.
Winston and Clementine had 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters. Tragically, one of their daughters passed away in early childhood. In politics, Churchill often encountered controversy wherever he went. Upon returning to the Conservative Party under Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, his initial role was as Chancellor of the Exchequer, but this proved to be a disastrous appointment. Then, during the general strike of 1926, It was reported that the forthright Churchill advocated using machine guns against the striking miners. He later admired Mussolini for his steadfastness against the communists, and when the Conservative government was defeated in 1929, Winston Churchill confronted what has since been termed his wilderness years. The First World War had been hailed as the war to end all wars, yet as Churchill worked on Marlborough, His Life and Times, a biography of his ancestor, while preoccupying himself with opposing the granting of independence to India, he became convinced that another world war was looming on the horizon. On the 28th of June 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles near Paris, following the end of the First World War. Defeated, Germany was compelled to accept full responsibility for the conflict, which involved significant reparations payments. It also lost extensive and valuable industrial territories, redistributed to France, Belgium, Poland, Lithuania, Denmark, and Czechoslovakia. Additionally, Germany had to adhere to complete disarmament, the abolition of military service, restrictions on military aircraft production, and the dismantling of arms manufacturing equipment. The burdens of war debts and sanctions had a profound impact on the German populace, and as Adolf Hitler, a former Austrian painter, began to rise in politics with a promise to restore national pride, many Germans took notice of his message. Throughout the 1930s, Hitler ruthlessly clawed his way to power, first as Chancellor of the German Reich and then as Führer, seizing the presidency to accompany his chancellorship. In 1933, Hitler launched a vitriolic attack on the communists for the Reichstag fire, as depicted in this Nazi propaganda film, when in truth, it was the Nazis themselves who were responsible for the blaze. In his quest for power, Hitler systematically dismantled all opposition to his vision of a new Germany. At this early stage, anyone who criticized his regime faced imprisonment in concentration camps. Groups targeted included Jews, liberals, socialists, communists, homosexuals, gypsies, Freemasons, and even those with disabilities. A pervasive climate of fear silenced many who might have otherwise protested against Hitler's tyranny. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe observed that Hitler had engaged in discussions with Western democracies about peace. However, Winston Churchill's distinctive warnings underscored that Hitler posed a grave threat to Europe's future peace and prosperity. Yet at that moment, the government remained unwilling to heed his cautions. By 1936, Hitler was defiantly shunning the Treaty of Versailles with monumental armament factories, a swiftly swelling army, and his own clandestine police force. When he brazenly invaded the Rhineland, a move strictly forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, Britain and France chose inaction, emboldening Hitler to become increasingly audacious, even forging alliances with Japan and Mussolini's Italy. In Britain, Stanley Baldwin's third term as Prime Minister faced mounting criticism over his foreign policy amid the intensifying crisis in Europe. The tension at home erupted into crisis following King George V's death. His eldest son prepared for coronation as King Edward VIII, but faced a constitutional upheaval due to his wish to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin had the difficult task of telling Edward he must abdicate if he pursued this scandalous ambition. Baldwin held his position until Edward's abdication led to the ascension of his younger brother as King George VI, after which he stepped down. Rumours swirled about Winston Churchill succeeding Baldwin, but Neville Chamberlain ultimately took charge at No. 10 Downing Street. If Chamberlain was eagerly anticipating leading the nation into an era of stability, he must have felt profound bitterness as Adolf Hitler audaciously annexed neighboring Austria in 1938. The German Führer then quickly set his sights on Czechoslovakia. Even with such blatant provocation, Neville Chamberlain remained firmly opposed to war, opting for an appeasement policy. Nevertheless, by the autumn of 1938, Europe teetered on the brink of conflict until Chamberlain boldly flew to Germany in person to confront Hitler, striving for a peaceful resolution. Chamberlain returned to Britain, famously brandishing a resolution signed by Hitler, which he proudly claimed signified peace for our time. Sadly for Chamberlain and the rest of the world, the resolution merely implied peace for the moment, as Hitler was playing games. The Führer had no intention of being satisfied with Austria and Czechoslovakia. Poland was next on his list, and when he signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union on the 23rd of August 1939, his intentions were unmistakable. This left Britain and France with the task of stopping Hitler in his tracks, as they had promised to assist Poland if it came under attack. As the German army thundered across the Polish frontier on the 1st of September, both nations issued an ultimatum to Hitler. Chamberlain insisted that German troops withdraw from Poland immediately, establishing a deadline of 11 a.m. on the 3rd of September. "15 minutes after the deadline had passed, there was no response from Hitler. Reluctantly, the peace-loving Chamberlain delivered a radio broadcast to inform the British public that they were now at war with Germany.
No such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany."
France followed suit mere hours later, and the nightmare Europe had dreaded erupted into reality. Not only would Europe suffer the catastrophic consequences of Adolf Hitler's relentless quest for power, but the entire international community was about to be ensnared in another devastating world war. Winston Churchill's prophetic warnings had been ignored, and the countdown began for Britain to brace itself for turmoil. Churchill had been Hitler's most ardent critic, and now his country desperately needed him. On September 3rd, when war was declared, Churchill rose from political exile, appointed First Lord of the Admiralty, echoing his pivotal role from 25 years prior in 1914. To suggest the nation felt relief would be an understatement. There's a rumor the British Navy signaled 3 resonant words: Winston is back. True or not, it captured the sentiments of the British populace. However, it soon became apparent that Neville Chamberlain and the War Cabinet remained naive, blissfully ignorant of past lessons. Even Hitler was aware of Churchill's perilous role to him, a stark contrast to the War Cabinet's perception. Just hours after the declaration, a German U-boat torpedoed and sank the SS Athenia, traversing the waters between Belfast and Montreal, with Americans aboard. Fearing US support for Britain, the Germans spun a propaganda tale, claiming a British submarine had sunk the vessel on Churchill's orders. It was ludicrous, and Americans saw through it, yet it ominously foreshadowed the sinister tactics to come from the German propaganda machine. Amidst a cloud of fear and uncertainty, the early months of conflict in the autumn and winter of 1939 were strikingly anticlimactic. In the tense days before September 3rd, many children were evacuated from London, only to return home when chaos failed to materialize. Gas masks became a grim necessity, accompanied by nightly blackouts and the conscription of young men aged 20 to 22. Despite the foreboding atmosphere, the threat of a German assault felt distant. This unsettling pause became known as the Phony War. Nevertheless, Winston Churchill, a man of action, believed Hitler's next target was neutral Norway and urged the dispatch of British troops to protect the Norwegians. Once again, Chamberlain and the War Cabinet underestimated Churchill's urgency. Tragically, by the time they acted, Hitler had invaded Norway and Denmark, leaving the Allies scrambling for a response. Denmark fell swiftly while the Norwegians fought fiercely for their independence, though they were ultimately overpowered. By early 1940, Adolf Hitler was surging toward complete domination of Europe and Scandinavia, leaving Britain in tense speculation about the Führer's next move. Great Britain, an island fortress, enjoyed a strategic advantage but faced a dire risk. German U-boats prowled the waters, threatening vital supply lines and forcing the United Kingdom into a desperate struggle for self-sufficiency. Rationing began in 1940, starting with butter, sugar, and bacon. However, the specter of scarcity soon loomed larger as meat, cheese, fresh eggs, jam, tea, breakfast cereals, and milk also fell under the grim shadow of rationing.
Now that you're receiving your ration books, he tells you what you should do now and what you may have to do if the need should come.
These little books may seem a bit complicated at first, but their purpose is quite simple. They mean that if, in the course of the war, we are short for a time of this or that article of food, rationing will give everyone, rich and poor alike, an equal share of all that's going. The only two things which it is now necessary to ration are bacon, which includes ham. A 1, 2.
People were urged to cultivate their gardens, grow their own fruits and vegetables, and keep livestock like chickens and rabbits. Yet, a cloud of uncertainty hung over the nation regarding Neville Chamberlain as faith in his leadership waned. As Adolf Hitler prepared to unleash his stormtroopers into the Low Countries and advance into France, tensions peaked with Chamberlain's resignation. Ironically, he battled illness, succumbing to cancer only 6 months after leaving office, while the spectre of the Nazis loomed larger over mainland Europe. The British sensed it. Only one man could rise to the monumental challenge of leadership. Winston Churchill stepped in as Prime Minister of an all-party government at the behest of King George VI on May 10, 1940, hours before the German Armada surged into France. The threat posed by Hitler was now undeniable. Upon ascending to the country's highest office, Churchill declared a resolute policy of no surrender. Even in the nation's darkest hours, he ignited a fierce spirit within the British people, inspiring them to passionately fight for their freedom and cherished values.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
Winston fervently heeded the haunting call of his heart, leading by fierce example, propelled by an unwavering resolve to obliterate Adolf Hitler and the malevolent machinations of the Nazis, giving rise to one of the most dramatic and pivotal narratives of the 20th century. Amidst the relentless blitzkrieg assault, which Churchill faced on that fateful dawn of his prime ministership, the storm swept violently through the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium, advancing with an unyielding fury towards the heart of France. As World War II erupted with terrifying ferocity, the valiant British Expeditionary Force was dispatched to the perilous Franco-Belgian border, teetering dangerously on the brink of calamity. The nation, ignited by Churchill's impassioned battle cry, rallied fiercely only days before being hurled into the greatest trial of their existence. On that harrowing evening of May 14, 1940, the Admiralty sent forth an urgent and dramatic call to arms. All owners of self-propelled pleasure craft between 30 and 100 feet must report details to the Admiralty within 14 days, if not already requisitioned. The response was a surge of defiance. Boats cascaded in from every corner of Britain, brimming with brave souls ready for the dire action ahead. Yet despair loomed as devastating news pierced through the atmosphere. Hitler's war machine unleashed a merciless pincer movement, ruthlessly bolstered by the relentless bombardments of the Luftwaffe. The Low Countries and France crumbled like fragile glass, leaving the BEF and Allied troops ensnared. Cornered like hunted prey, staring into the grim abyss of retreat to the northern coast, bereft of reinforcements from the south. It became clear that relief from the south was a fantasy, as Winston Churchill and his military advisors faced grim realities. Nearly 500,000 Allied soldiers, vital to the war effort, were trapped by Hitler. Even if they reached the northern French coast, only 45,000 could be rescued, a devastatingly small number. With the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, Britain's new Prime Minister longed for a miracle. The ideal lifeline was the route from Calais to Dover, but the Germans controlled this strategic port. The only hope lay in Dunkirk, a far from ideal option, but with the German advance, every second was critical. The clock was ticking, the stakes were high, and each moment threatened to extinguish hope for those on the brink of disaster. On the fateful 26th of May, Operation Dynamo was set in motion against a backdrop of chaos, aiming to evacuate the beleaguered Allied soldiers from the besieged beaches of Dunkirk. Aware that only a fraction of the stranded men could be saved, the Admiralty in London prepared for the worst. To this day, the indomitable spirit of Dunkirk is celebrated. The beaches were scenes of devastation. Abandoned tanks and wrecked vehicles lay scattered along the coastline, leaving soldiers vulnerable to the relentless onslaught of the Luftwaffe. In a last-ditch plea, Vice Admiral Ramsay summoned every available small boat, envisioning a daring operation that could turn the tide. Can you get every available craft round to me within 24 hours? As civilian operators of pleasure boats rallied to answer the call, a miraculous rescue plan unfolded. One that would allow Winston Churchill to witness a glimmer of hope rising from despair. Between May 30th and June 2nd, nearly 1,000 crafts surged through turbulent waters as the brave Royal Navy heroically rescued over 330,000 men. With each moment, evacuation efforts from the besieged shores of Normandy and Bordeaux swelled the total to more than 500,000 Allied troops, one-third of whom were not British, snatched from despair to fight another day. The RAF played a pivotal role in the operation, valiantly shielding the rescue craft from the relentless Luftwaffe as they crossed the perilous English Channel, inflicting staggering losses on the enemy at a fearsome rate of 4-1. In an astonishing twist, an entire fighting force was snatched right from under Hitler's nose, defying the odds with remarkable tenacity. Though the Germans remained in a position of power, this critical miscalculation would haunt them profoundly. Military historians have debated why Hitler let the BEF slip through his grasp. Some argue he was blinded by his eagerness to seize Paris, while others contend that the Luftwaffe craved the glory of finishing off the stranded Allied troops from above. On the fateful 24th of May, against all expectations, Hitler unexpectedly halted his grand offensive for a period of rest and relaxation, unwittingly creating a crucial opportunity for Operation Dynamo. Yet, as would tragically occur on numerous occasions throughout the war, Hitler underestimated the indomitable spirit that Winston Churchill could ignite. In Dunkirk's case, the Germans likely assumed that they had the luxury of time. After all, even the Admiralty and Churchill considered it improbable that more than a quarter of the trapped men would escape. The escape from Dunkirk provided the crucial morale boost that Britain desperately needed. When Churchill addressed the nation after all was safe back in England, his speech resonated as one of his finest rallying cries. "We shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them on the landing grounds. We shall fight them in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight them in the hills. We shall never surrender." In this powerful speech, Winston Churchill emphasized the RAF's crucial role in the daring return of the BEF from France, all while the newspapers kept their vital involvement shrouded in secrecy. If the Germans were left in doubt about the might of the British military, they could very well underestimate their foe, just as they had at Dunkirk, with catastrophic consequences looming ahead. In the wake of triumphantly occupying France, Hitler shifted his gaze towards Britain, now intoxicated by the delusion of his Nazi war machine's invincibility. Yet, looming over his ambitious plans of occupation was a formidable adversary that even he recognized: the Royal Navy. The Germans might have rested in the skies, but the Luftwaffe would have to obliterate the British warships if an invasion were to have any hope of success. But first, the Luftwaffe had to eliminate the looming threat posed by the RAF. As the Battle of Britain erupted over southern England, Hitler brimmed with confidence, certain his air force would swiftly crush their enemy. Yet again, he had overlooked the indomitable Winston Churchill factor and the raw courage of the British when all hope seemed lost. The RAF was horrendously short of fighter pilots, yet they soared into the skies with unyielding resolve to hold the Luftwaffe at bay. Still, the task was Herculean, and Hitler's pilots were just days away from obliterating the RAF, though, fortunately for the British, the Germans remained blissfully ignorant of their impending victory. Then fate, fortune, chance, call it what you will, suddenly altered the course of the battle and might well have changed the war's outcome entirely. A German bomber, relentlessly pursued by an RAF fighter pilot, found itself over London, where it unleashed its deadly cargo. In a swift response, Winston Churchill ordered bombing raids on German cities, convinced that Hitler had directed the assault on London. Enraged, Hitler retaliated fiercely, redirecting the Luftwaffe from RAF airfields to unleash devastation upon London instead. Though the city bore the brunt of intense damage, it bought the RAF crucial time to regroup and return to the skies. This shift in the war's tide meant any German invasion plans by sea would be stymied until the spring of 1941, with autumn and winter tides rendering an attack impossible. If Winston Churchill had felt his first months as wartime Prime Minister were a baptism of fire, he now confronted the harrowing reality of watching London burn. In a desperate quest for dominance, Hitler unleashed brutal air attacks on British cities and civilians. Only Winston Churchill's extraordinary leadership could counter the relentless Nazi advance. Nights turned harrowing as the Luftwaffe's bombing raids, known as the Blitz, drove terrified residents into cramped air raid shelters, where they grabbed fleeting moments of sleep. Each dawn revealed more homes in ruins, yet Churchill's steadfast resolve and stirring speeches ignited hope among Londoners. Beyond London, dark shadows hovered over Coventry, Plymouth, Birmingham, Portsmouth, Southampton, Manchester, and Sheffield. But the unyielding spirit of the British people remained strong, defying despair. As the dawn of 1941 broke, Winston Churchill stood resolute, rallying the nation against a relentless enemy. The shadows of the Blitz loomed large, marking the somber loss of 40,000 lives and casting over 1 million into despair. Though Hitler's ambitions to obliterate the RAF and conquer Britain had crumbled, by May 1941, his gaze shifted ominously eastward, fixating on Russia. As the death toll soared, the Blitz began to wane, with 2/3 of the German military diverted to the Eastern Front to unleash havoc upon the Russians. Following the crushing defeats of Mussolini and the Italian army across Greece and North Africa, the Germans faced an overwhelming scramble to spread their grasp. Thus, the invasion of Britain would have to be postponed. As 1941 progressed, Hitler's ambitions crumbled under the weight of reality, mirroring Napoleon's disastrous campaign in the 19th century. The relentless Russian winter brutalized any hopes for a swift advance on the Eastern Front towards Moscow. Thousands of brave German troops found themselves stuck in a desperate stalemate. Meanwhile, throughout the early part of the war, Winston Churchill forged a crucial alliance with American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, as the United States gallantly provided essential military hardware to Britain on a lend-lease basis, salvaging the remnants of hope lost on the treacherous journey to Dunkirk. Yet, as 1941 drew to its harrowing close, the Americans faced a cataclysmic attack of their own, plunging the full might of the USA into the fray. On that fateful day, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese unleashed a thunderous air raid on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, leaving devastation in its wake. In a chilling turn of events, Germany declared war on America, and the Pacific Theater erupted into chaos as Japan marched into the Philippines, Burma, and Hong Kong. Conspiracy theorists have had a field day questioning whether Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt were aware of the impending attack on Pearl Harbor. The Americans' entry into the war emboldened Churchill, and the ruthless aggression of the Japanese left Roosevelt with little opposition in committing the USA to this colossal global conflict. However, that fateful December morning in 1941 thrust Adolf Hitler and his nefarious axis of evil into a nightmare beyond his darkest imaginings. For the resilient people of Britain, under Churchill's rallying cry, 1942 shone with the promise of a brighter dawn. Yet, amidst the flicker of hope, hardships escalated on the home front, where clothes and food were now rationed. Even so, the influx of American manpower, money, and military might ignited a fierce determination that Hitler could finally be halted in his relentless advance.
Without a doubt that the fate of Holland and Belgium, like that of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, will be decided by the victory of the British Empire and the French Republic.
In this impending confrontation, the world held its breath as destiny hung in the balance. As the months dragged on, the chilling realities of the German concentration camps emerged, igniting a fierce determination among the Allies. With grim resolve, the tide of war began to shift against the tyrannical grip of Hitler. The relentless battle in the Atlantic raged on, with German U-boats mercilessly sinking Allied ships until the brilliant minds at Bletchley Park triumphed, cracking the Enigma code that had shielded the enemy's secrets. Mathematicians toiled fiercely alongside military leaders, driven by an unwavering commitment to the war effort and inspired by Winston Churchill. Every inch was fiercely contested in intense battles both on the front lines and the home front. Breakthroughs erupted with Field Marshal Montgomery's audacity in North Africa, while the Russians launched a fierce counteroffensive at Stalingrad. Throughout this tumultuous period, Winston Churchill emerged as a beacon of hope. He braved the bombed-out cities and rallied the troops in battle, undeterred by the peril surrounding him. A man of the people, he stood resolutely beside them, embodying resilience. Wherever he led, the British people were ready to follow into the fray. Throughout the fateful year of 1944, the Allies pressed forward with unwavering resolve, each of their moves culminating in monumental preparations for liberation. At dawn on June 6th, the combined might of Allied forces set sail from the shores of England, poised to storm the beaches of France in the legendary D-Day, where an astonishing fleet of 6,500 vessels braved tumultuous waters to carry 130,000 brave souls undetected by the German war machine. This remarkable strategy misled the Germans into anticipating an assault on Calais, while the beaches of Normandy were chosen as the battleground. Adding to the drama, a furious tempest raged as the Armada battled monstrous waves. Yet the Germans foolishly underestimated their opponents, presuming the Allies would never dare to execute such a bold incursion amidst horrible storms. On that day, the 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, became sites of fierce resistance. While Utah had scarce defenders, Omaha transformed into a gruesome battleground where American troops fought valiantly against overwhelming odds. The struggle for liberation culminated only in August, with the quest to vanquish the Germans and reach Berlin promising to be a harrowing endeavor. Fatefully, the relentless Russians claimed Berlin first, sealing Adolf Hitler's grim fate as he met his end in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. A chilling testament to the downfall of tyranny. On the fateful 7th of May, the Germans finally surrendered unconditionally, marking a monumental shift in history. The war in Europe had reached its chilling end, and the very next day, as the people of Britain erupted into fervent victory celebrations, Winston Churchill found himself at the epicenter of a nation's heartfelt gratitude for the long-awaited peace. When the royal family appeared triumphantly on the gilded balcony of Buckingham Palace, Waving to the jubilant crowds in the mall, Winston Churchill received a prestigious invitation to join them. With his iconic V for Victory sign and larger-than-life presence, he expertly guided Britain from the bleakest shadows of war into a resplendent new world. Tragically, his dear friend, Franklin D. Roosevelt, did not live to witness this momentous conclusion, having passed away in April 1945. At long last, World War II had ceased, but for Churchill, the notion of retirement was an unimaginable luxury he could not contemplate. Undeniably, Winston Churchill was a towering figure, yet he proved to be a complex enigma. He wrestled with depression, calling it his black dog, and lacked the renowned tact or diplomacy of many leaders. When faced with an issue, he never hesitated to confront it head-on, though his repartee sparkled with wit. One memorable moment came when Lady Nancy Astor, irked by Churchill, declared that if she were his wife, she'd poison his coffee, to which he quipped that if he were her husband, he'd drink it. These humorous exchanges barely masked the profound changes afoot in Britain post-war, a spirit awakening that birthed a national health service, a welfare state, and educational equity for all. Churchill's pre-war views on striking miners and machine guns stood in stark contrast to the nation's urgent need for healing and rebirth. In the tumultuous general election of 1945, he faced a staggering defeat at the hands of Clement Attlee and the Labour Party. Winston Churchill returned to Downing Street as Prime Minister in 1951, yet the inexorable march of time weighed heavily upon his shoulders. Knighted as Sir Winston Churchill KG in 1953 and awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, he embodied an indomitable spirit. However, as the shadows lengthened and he approached his 80th year in 1955, he took his final bow from public life. Spending his twilight years at cherished Chartwell in Kent, he was honored in 1963 as the first honorary citizen of the United States. However, his frail health prevented him from accepting this commendation. After enduring a debilitating stroke, Churchill passed away on January 24, 1965, at the venerable age of 90. Following a state funeral imbued with solemnity, he was laid to rest in the peaceful embrace of the Churchill family plot at St. Martin's Church in Blaydon, near Blenheim Palace, his birthplace. The saga of World War II defined Sir Winston Churchill's finest hour. His impassioned words, a pledge of blood, toil, tears, and sweat, only partially encapsulated his towering legacy. The BBC poll in 2002 named him the greatest Briton ever, a testament to the truth that unexpected heroes can remain forever in the hearts of generations, having etched their names into the annals of history rather than merely traversing its pages.